The wild turns deadly when humans encounter hungry predators. From a grizzly tearing apart a $180,000 SUV and killing 3 men in Russia to a Kodiak ambushing a lone angler in the fog, from a black bear raiding a research camp to a climber falling to a brown bear on an Alaskan cliff. Danger can strike anywhere. In this video, we'll uncover 6 shocking true bear attack stories that redefine fear in the wild. On August 25, 2025, deep in the wild valleys of Russia's Ussuri Krai, 4 men from St. Petersburg arrived in a gleaming SUV worth nearly $180,000. They were wealthy businessmen, used to boardrooms and city towers, not thick forests filled with roaming predators. The group had chosen the trip as a form of luxury escape, bringing expensive rifles, crates of food, and fine drink. Their journey was meant to be one of thrill and pride, but it carried a shadow from the start. Local villagers had warned them that these mountains belonged to the Russian grizzly, one of the largest and most unpredictable beasts in the world. The warnings were brushed aside, drowned by confidence and wealth. The leader of the group was Dmitry Sokolov, a man of 46 with a taste for bold ventures. His close friends, Ivan Morozov and Sergei Pavlov, both in their early 40s, shared his risk appetite, often seeing themselves as untouchable due to their wealth and influence. The youngest, Alexei Ivanin, at 38, was less certain but followed the others out of loyalty. They carried with them luxury gear, imported coolers, and crates stacked high in the SUV's spacious back. In their eagerness, they left smoked fish sealed inside the vehicle, unaware that the scent would carry far on the cold night air. As dawn broke, the calm was shattered. A massive Russian grizzly, its weight close to half a ton, prowled into the clearing, led by the powerful aroma of preserved fish. The SUV, shining under the pale sun, became its target. With brutal force, the bear slammed its paws against the frame, denting the metal. Glass exploded as claws ripped through windows. The predator tore open the rear door and dragged the cooler out, devouring the contents while continuing to batter the vehicle. The sight of the expensive machine crumpling under the beast's strength was almost unreal, but it was only the beginning. Awakened by the noise, the men stumbled from their tents. Instead of retreating, they reacted with drunken boldness. Horns blared and flares cracked through the morning air. Their actions only fueled the grizzly's fury. The animal roared, dropping what remained of the cooler, and charged. Dmitry was the first to be struck, lifted off his feet as claws slashed across his chest. Ivan and Sergei rushed forward, but the bear's sheer power cut them down in seconds, their bodies dragged violently into the grass. Blood stained the clearing as the predator's rage tore through the men without pause. Amid the chaos, Alexei bolted toward the opposite side, crashing into thorny brush. Branches cut into his skin as he crawled deeper, heart racing. From his hiding place, he could hear the screams fade, and the brutal sounds of the attack echo across the clearing. The predator's wrath left destruction not only to human life but also to the shattered vehicle that had once been a symbol of wealth and pride. From the thorny brush, Alexei stayed frozen, his body pressed flat against the cold ground. The grizzly loomed in the clearing, pacing near the wrecked vehicle. Its jaws dripped with fragments of the meal it had stolen, its chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The forest was silent except for the beast's growls and the crunch of metal as it struck the SUV again, tearing deeper into the frame as if testing its own strength. The luxury car, once gleaming and flawless, now sagged under the damage, its panels bent, its glass scattered like frost across the earth. Minutes passed, like hours, as Alexei's pulse thudded in his ears. He dared not move while the predator lingered. The ruined clearing reeked of smoke from the flares, blood from his friends, and the sour scent of food. The grizzly prowled in wide circles before finally retreating into the forest, vanishing between towering pines as quickly as it had appeared. Only then did Alexei stagger from the undergrowth, his face pale, his limbs trembling. The sight before him was unbearable. Dmitry, Ivan, and Sergei lay motionless on the grass, their bodies mangled by the attack. Their hunting rifles were scattered nearby, useless against the predator's sheer speed. The SUV, valued at $180,000, was a twisted carcass of steel and glass, its tailgate torn away and its interior shredded. It looked less like a machine of wealth and more like a broken toy left in the path of nature's wrath. Shaking, Alexei stumbled toward the dirt track that wound back to the village. His skin burned with cuts from the branches, and his body throbbed with bruises from the frantic escape. Every step felt endless, but he forced himself forward, guided by the desperate need to survive. At last, he reached the first cluster of wooden houses. where a villager spotted his limp and rushed to help. The alarm spread quickly. Within an hour, word reached authorities, and a team of armed rangers set out toward the site. When they arrived, the devastation confirmed Alexei's story. They found 3 lifeless bodies, the SUV torn apart, and claw marks etched deep into the soil and steel. It was clear that no wealth, no luxury, and no arrogance could withstand the fury of a hungry grizzly. Officials later issued stern warnings, reminding everyone that careless behavior in the wilderness can lead to tragedy. They pointed to the cooler of smoked fish, left inside the car, as the fatal mistake. Food left unsecured had lured one of the largest predators in the region straight into camp. They stressed that respect for the wild is not a choice but a necessity, and survival depends on preparation rather than pride. For Alexei, the scars were not just on his skin but etched into his memory. He had gone into the forest with friends and riches but returned alone, carrying the weight of loss and the lesson that nature shows no mercy when provoked. On June 23, 2025, Ethan Parker, a 35-year-old angler from Anchorage, made his way to a secluded inlet of Kodiak Island. He had grown up fishing since he was a boy, spending summers with his grandfather along rivers in Alaska, where patience and quiet observation became second nature to him. Over the years, fishing had turned into more than a pastime. It was how he escaped the demands of his construction job and found calm in places far from crowded streets. Ethan was known among his friends for his solitary nature. Unlike others who preferred company, he enjoyed fishing alone, especially in remote places where the only sounds were water and birds. He planned his trip carefully, carrying basic gear, a small tent, and a rifle for protection. Yet on this trip, his focus was on fly fishing, not on danger. The misty morning had settled thick around the inlet, giving the water a ghostly calm. To him, that solitude was perfect. To the island's predators, however, it was an open chance. After casting for several hours, he managed to catch several salmon, laying them on rocks to clean later. The scent drifted easily through the damp air. Ethan was tired but pleased with his effort, unaware of what the smell might invite. He stood with his jacket loosely tied around his waist, the rod in his hands, boots half submerged in the chill of the tide. Through the curtain of fog, a shape emerged. At first, it was just a shadow, moving silently between the rocks and the tall grass. Within moments, the figure became clear. A massive Kodiak bear, its thick coat wet from morning dew, its bulk towering against the pale sky. It moved with slow precision, its head low, nostrils flaring as it locked onto the fish resting on the stones. Ethan's heart pounded, his body freezing as he realized the danger. Before he could retreat, the animal surged forward. Its speed was terrifying for its size. In a single bound, it closed the distance, one paw striking across his legs with a force that sent him tumbling. The blow knocked him backward into the icy shallows, the water swallowing him with a painful shock that made him gasp. The bear advanced, its growl vibrating through the fog. Ethan kicked wildly, his boots splashing as he tried to crawl backward. The cold bit into his skin as panic surged through him. With desperate hands, he grabbed at the soaked ground, reaching for anything within reach. His jacket slipped free into the water, but he waved it frantically, hoping to distract the beast's focus. The predator swiped again, claws raking through the surface, missing him by inches. Its sheer presence was overwhelming, towering above the angler, snarling with eyes fixed not only on the fish but on the man himself. Ethan's breath came in sharp bursts as he fumbled for his emergency kit, his trembling fingers closing around the flare gun. The fog wrapped the scene in eerie silence, broken only by the crash of water and the bear's thunderous growls. The flare slipped into Ethan's shaking grip as the massive animal loomed over him. Water poured from his sleeves as he fumbled to ignite the device, the cold stinging with every movement. With a spark and sudden burst of red light, fire hissed into the mist. The brightness pierced the fog, startling the predator. The bear halted mid-stride, its head jerking back. Its eyes reflected the glow of the setting sun. For a tense moment, the shoreline was frozen in silence except for the flare's hiss. The beast turned away slightly, shaking its head, but its body still blocked the inlet. Ethan pressed the burning stick forward, his breaths sharp and uneven. The sudden heat and smoke created a barrier that forced the animal to retreat in small steps. With a deep growl, it finally swung around and moved into the woods, the white haze swallowing its heavy frame until nothing remained but the echoes of its movement. Ethan collapsed in the shallow water, his body trembling from shock and cold. His right shoulder throbbed with pain where it had dislocated during the fall. Bruises covered his legs from the first strike, and his lungs burned from the icy plunge, Dragging himself to the bank, he pulled free of the water, his soaked clothes heavy as stone. The flare sputtered and died, leaving only the dim light of morning filtering through the fog. Minutes stretched like hours as Ethan gathered the will to rise. His gear was scattered, his jacket floating near the rocks, his rod snapped in two. He stumbled toward his small pack, teeth chattering as cold crept deep into his chest. Fingers stiff, he tried to wrap his shoulder with strips of cloth, but each movement sent sharp jolts of pain through his body. Hypothermia gnawed at him, making every step slower, every thought heavier. He knew the camp was miles away, but staying meant death. Forcing himself forward, he followed the narrow shoreline path. The mist clung to him like a shroud, and each gust of wind seemed to carry the memory of the beast's growl. His boots squelched against the wet ground as he pushed through, driven only by instinct. Hours later, he reached the small canvas shelter he had pitched the night before. Collapsing inside, he curled beneath his spare blanket, his body convulsing as warmth slowly returned. Pain throbbed from every limb, but he had survived. Sleep came in restless waves, haunted by the vision of claws cutting through the air. News of the attack spread after he managed to signal passing fishermen the next day. Officials emphasized how the fog made encounters worse, as it hid the approach of predators until they were dangerously close. They warned that leaving fish unattended even briefly could draw one of the most powerful land predators in North America. Ethan's survival was marked not by strength alone, but by the quick use of a single flare. Yet the lesson stayed clear. On Kodiak Island, every misstep in the fog carries a price, and no angler, no matter how experienced, is beyond the reach of the wild. On May 20th, 2023, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, 32-year-old Dr. Carla Jenkins led a small group of students on a research trip focused on rare salamanders. Carla had always been fascinated by the hidden world of small creatures, spending her childhood near mountain streams, turning over rocks, and recording what she found in a small notebook. Years of study led her into ecology, where she became respected for her dedication to fieldwork in harsh conditions. Unlike many who preferred the safety of labs, Carla loved remote sites. She believed the best discoveries came when people left comfort behind and embraced the wild. The research camp was basic, with canvas tents arranged in a rough circle around a fire pit. Coolers sat to the side, packed with food for days, while notebooks and sampling jars were stored neatly under tarps. The site was far from the nearest road, requiring a hike through rugged terrain just to reach it. Students admired Carla's energy as she moved between groups, checking their observations and offering quiet advice. By nightfall, laughter faded into calm, and the forest grew heavy with the deep hum of insects. Just after midnight, shadows stirred near the edge of the clearing. Unnoticed, a large black bear slipped silently from the tree line, its nose twitching at the smell of sandwiches and fruit left inside the coolers. The animal moved low to the ground, powerful and quiet, until it was within the heart of the camp. The students slept, unaware of the danger, while Carla, still awake with a notebook in hand, caught the first glimpse of its dark shape near the supplies. Her heart pounded as she realized what had happened. Food had been left out, and now the worst risk of mountain camps had arrived. She scrambled to wake the nearest student, urging them to gather quickly, but the movement drew the animal's attention. With startling speed, the bear lunged toward her. Its paw swiped downward, claws tearing through her shoulder and arm, shredding cloth and skin alike. Carla staggered backward, pain ripping through her body, blood soaking her sleeve. Screams filled the night as students scrambled from tents, tripping over gear and scattering into the clearing. The bear pressed forward, its head swinging side to side, jaws snapping as it pawed at coolers and tore through backpacks. Tents collapsed under their weight as claws ripped nylon into ribbons. Supplies scattered across the dirt, glass jars and metal pans clattering as the predator thrashed through camp. Students shouted and clanged poles against rocks, their desperate cries echoing through the trees. But the animal only circled, sniffing the air thick with the scent of food and fear. For minutes that felt like hours, the chaos continued. Carla clutched her arm, her face pale with pain as she tried to stay upright. The bear lingered just beyond the circle of firelight, its dark figure looming, waiting, testing. The team's courage and noise began to push it back, but the night was far from safe. The clearing fell into a tense silence once the predator slipped back into the trees. Only the sound of labored breathing and faint whimpers filled the ruined campsite. Carla pressed her injured arm against her chest, trying to stop the steady flow of blood while her students gathered around her in shock. The adrenaline that had carried them through the frenzy was fading, leaving behind trembling limbs and pale faces. Shredded tents sagged against the ground, ripped open as if by blades. Backpacks were torn apart, their contents scattered across dirt and leaves. Some notebooks lay soaked in spilled water, while food wrappers fluttered in the faint breeze. The coolers that had first drawn the animal were overturned, lids snapped open, meat and bread strewn in every direction. It was clear the camp was no longer safe, and the faint outline of the bear still seemed to linger beyond the tree line, reminding everyone that it could return at any moment. Carla tried to keep her mind sharp despite the waves of pain coursing through her body. Her sleeve clung wet and heavy, and her shoulder burned with every movement. The students huddled near her, unsure whether to flee into the night or stay in the wreckage. With no road nearby and no phone signal in the deep valley, their only hope was to regroup and make a plan at first light. They moved carefully around the mess, dragging what remained of their gear into a tighter circle. Metal pans were stacked and struck together every few minutes, the harsh clanging echoing into the dark in an effort to deter the predator from returning. Each sound of cracking branches in the distance made hearts pound, but the bear did not charge again. As the hours crawled forward, exhaustion weighed on them. Carla sat against a log, pale but conscious, whispering short instructions to those nearest. One student managed to clean her arm with what little antiseptic remained, binding it with strips of fabric torn from a sleeping bag. The makeshift bandage slowed the bleeding, but the wound was deep, and the risk of infection hung heavy. When dawn finally broke, gray light revealed the destruction in full. The camp resembled less a research station and more the aftermath of a storm. The ground was littered with claw marks, paw prints pressed deep into the soil, and torn fabric flapping gently against broken branches. No one spoke much as they packed what was left, their movements heavy with fatigue. The group began the long walk toward the nearest ranger outpost, carrying Carla on a stretcher pieced together from branches and tarp. The path was rough, their progress slow, but the need to escape the valley pushed them forward. Every rustle in the undergrowth brought fresh fear, though the bear never showed itself again. By the time they reached safety, the news had spread quickly. Officials reminded others that even experienced field teams could become vulnerable when food was not stored properly. Carla's injuries healed with time, but scars remained along her arm and shoulder, a lasting mark of that night. The lesson became part of her teaching, that the wilderness is never tamed, and even science camps must respect the power of wild predators. On July 9, 2024, 36-year-old Ethan Cole and his girlfriend, 34-year-old Maya Thompson, set out into the rugged Chugach Mountains of Alaska to test their climbing skills on a remote cliff face. Ethan had grown up in Colorado, spending much of his youth scaling rock walls and icy slopes. His love for the outdoors eventually pulled him north to Alaska, where the wilderness felt raw and untamed. Maya shared his passion, having trained as a physical therapist but always carving time for travel and adventure. Together, they sought challenges that demanded strength, balance, and courage. Their bond grew stronger with each expedition, and this climb was meant to be one more shared memory carved into the wild peaks. That morning, the two carried minimal gear, ropes, and packs with water, dried food, and supplies. The cliffs rose high above the valley floor, jagged and uneven, with small ledges that offered brief rests between demanding stretches. The air was crisp, the sky scattered with thin clouds, and the only sound was the call of distant birds. For hours they focused on steady progress, muscles straining as they worked upward. The steep face allowed no room for mistakes, but both had years of experience and trusted each other's rhythm. Midway through the climb, Ethan reached a small outcrop where he paused to adjust his line. He leaned against the cool rock, exhaling slowly, when sudden movement broke the stillness. From a shadowed crevice just feet away, a massive brown bear pushed forward, its bulk wedged between stone. Drawn to the faint scent of dried fish packed in their bag, it had taken refuge in the rocks. Neither climber expected such a presence high above the valley floor, but the bear emerged with startling force. The sight froze Ethan for an instant before his survival instincts kicked in. He shifted back, but the bear surged upward, powerful forelimbs striking at him with terrifying speed. One swipe cut through his jacket, knocking his body sideways. His fingers slipped from the handhold, and he tumbled down to a narrow ledge below. The impact stunned him, leaving him sprawled against the rock as dust and pebbles showered down. The predator climbed closer, eyes locked on him, jaws snapping as it advanced. Ethan tried to brace himself, but the weight of the animal crushed against him. Claws raked across his torso, tearing cloth and skin, while its teeth clamped down with shocking strength. Above, Maya clung to the rope, panic gripping her as she watched helplessly. Her screams carried over the mountains as she hurled gear downward, ropes and metal carabiners clattering against the stone. For a brief second, the chaos startled the beast, and it pulled back with a snarl before vanishing into the forested slope below. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Maya's sobs as she looked down at Ethan's battered form. His body lay still on the ledge, wounds deep, breath shallow. The wild cliff face, once a place of challenge and triumph, had become a stage for horror. The ledge where Ethan fell grew quiet after the predator slipped away into the forest below. Dust settled around his still form as Maya clung to the rope above, her arms shaking with exhaustion and fear. She forced herself to descend slowly, her fingers raw against the stone as she reached the narrow ledge. The sight of Ethan's broken body left her trembling. His chest rose and fell faintly, but his skin was pale and his wounds ran deep. Blood darkened the rock beneath him, seeping into cracks of the mountain wall. Maya pressed her hands against the torn fabric of his torso, trying to slow the flow, but the injuries were far beyond what she could treat. Her pack, which carried only small first aid supplies, had been tossed aside during the chaos. She shouted into the valley below, but there was no answer. The remoteness of their climb now weighed on her, the isolation pressing as heavily as the rock face above. Hours crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Maya stayed beside Ethan, whispering words of comfort as if her voice could hold him in the world a little longer. His breathing grew shallower, each rise of his chest slower than the last. By the time faint shapes appeared in the sky, the distant sound of a rescue helicopter echoing against the cliffs, Ethan's breath had already faded into silence. Maya cradled him until rescuers reached the ledge, her face streaked with tears and dust. The team secured her with ropes and lifted both her and Ethan from the cliff. On the valley floor, medical personnel confirmed what she already knew. The damage was too great, and his life had slipped away long before help arrived. Maya sat in shock, her arms folded across her chest, watching as they carried him toward the waiting aircraft. News of the tragedy spread quickly across Alaska, shocking both the climbing and wildlife communities. Officials inspected the area and found claw marks across the stone near the crevice where the bear had appeared. They warned that the predator had likely been drawn by the faint smell of food packed in their bags, a reminder that even small traces can lure powerful animals. The mountains, usually considered a refuge from such dangers, proved that no altitude could guarantee safety. In the weeks that followed, Maya's life changed forever. She left Alaska soon after, returning home with scars that could not be seen but would never fade. Ethan's family held a memorial, remembering him not only for his passion for adventure, but also for his kindness and determination. His name became tied to the harsh lesson that the wild does not bend to human plans, no matter how careful or skilled one may be. The Chugach Mountains stood silent after the rescue, peaks draped in snow and shadow. The ledge where Ethan fell became a place of memory, etched into the stone like the claw marks left behind. For those who have heard the story, it serves as a reminder that beauty and danger often coexist in wild places, and that the cost of underestimating nature can be irreversible. On February 15, 2025, Alex Hart, 28, and Maya Lynn, 27, set out into the Montana backcountry with skis strapped tight and packs filled with layers, food, and avalanche gear. Both had built their lives around a passion for snow and mountains. Alex, raised in Colorado, had spent winters climbing and skiing slopes that tested his endurance. He worked as a mountain guide in the warmer months, carrying a calm confidence in wild terrain. Maya, who grew up in Washington, had studied environmental science and spent her free time skiing, finding peace in the silence of the winter woods. Together, they often chased powder and solitude in places where few dared to go. Their bond grew stronger in the wilderness, each relying on the other in moments of challenge. That morning, the sky was gray and heavy, winds sweeping powder across ridges. They climbed for hours, their skins gripping the slope until they reached a ridge that overlooked a deep basin. The descent was supposed to be the reward, a few minutes of swift movement through soft snow before the long journey back. But conditions grew harsh as clouds sank lower, cutting visibility until the world around them was a blur of white. Trees appeared like shadows, and the only sound was the crunch of skis carving down the slope. Halfway through the descent, Alex veered slightly to find firmer ground near a drifted line of evergreens. The air was still, heavy with snow, when sudden movement shattered the quiet. From the trees, a massive grizzly surged forward, its coat thick with winter fur, its breath steaming in the frozen air. It had likely been tracking deer through the basin, hunger driving it close to the ski line. Neither skier expected such a predator in deep winter, but the beast appeared with terrifying speed. Alex tried to turn, but the icy crust betrayed him. His skis slipped, sending him tumbling into a snowbank just as the bear lunged. The weight of the predator crashed into him, claws tearing across his torso, slicing through jacket and layers, raking skin beneath. Snow exploded upward, scattering gear across the slope. The storm muffled his cry as the animal pressed closer, growls shaking the air. Above, Maya froze for a heartbeat, before instinct pushed her forward. She slammed her ski poles against a nearby rock, the metallic clang cutting through the howl of wind. Her voice echoed over the slope as she screamed, desperate to draw the animal's focus. The bear circled, paws sinking into drifts, its head swinging between prey and distraction. Alex struggled in the snow, breath ragged, blood staining the whiteness around him. The standoff dragged on, seconds stretching into an eternity. The predator growled and paced, its massive body looming against the snow-laden trees. Finally, with one last rumble, it turned and melted back into the forest, leaving behind claw marks and scattered gear. Maya dropped beside Alex, hands shaking as she pulled him upright, his jacket torn to shreds, his body bloodied but alive. Snow swirled heavily around them as Maya crouched beside Alex, her hands pressing against the deep gashes across his torso. His breath came in short gasps, clouding the frigid air while blood seeped steadily into the drift beneath him. The slope that had promised freedom now felt like a trap, miles from shelter, miles from help. Maya's pulse raced as she looked down the endless valley, knowing they were alone against the vast winter wilderness. She forced him upright, draping his arm over her shoulders, and together they stumbled through knee-deep powder. Each step was agony for him, his boots dragging as crimson stained the snow behind them. Maya's skis had been tossed aside during the chaos, so they trudged slowly, fighting the cold and the weight of fear. The whiteout thickened, winds whipping across their faces, reducing the world to a blur of swirling flakes. The silence left by the predator felt eerie, broken only by the crunch of their steps and the labored sound of Alex's breathing. Minutes stretched into an hour as they edged down toward the tree line, searching for cover. Maya's muscles shook from effort, but she refused to stop. She found a cluster of firs where branches sheltered the ground from the storm, and she lowered Alex against a trunk. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, but he clung stubbornly to consciousness. She ripped open her pack, fumbling for bandages and a thermal blanket. Her fingers were numb, but she wrapped him tightly, layering spare clothes over his trembling body. The forest seemed alive with tension, every creak of wood or gust of wind stirring fear that the beast might return. Maya kept her poles within reach, though she knew they would offer little protection if the massive shape reappeared. Hours passed in that fragile refuge as the storm raged overhead, snow burying the tracks that led back to the open slope. The wilderness pressed close, indifferent to their struggle. At last, a faint hum rose above the wind. Maya blinked against the flakes, straining to hear. The sound grew louder, echoing against the ridges, until the outline of a search helicopter emerged through the storm. She stumbled from the trees, waving her arms desperately, her voice raw from shouting. The aircraft hovered, and rescuers dropped to the ground, rushing to her side. They lifted Alex gently onto a stretcher, their gloved hands steady as they secured him for evacuation. Relief washed through her body, but it was fragile, shadowed by exhaustion. The flight back was a blur of noise and vibration. Maya sat pressed against the cabin wall, watching as medics worked swiftly over Alex. His chest rose faintly beneath the blankets, each breath a battle. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. The memory of the predator's roar etched into her mind. In the days that followed, Alex underwent surgeries to mend torn flesh and broken muscle. He survived, but his body carried the scars of that winter ambush. Officials later warned that heavy snow and scarce food had driven predators into unusual places, making remote travel even more dangerous. For Maya, the memory of that slope remained a permanent scar, a poignant reminder that beauty and danger often walk hand in hand in the cold, silent backcountry. On July 21, 2024, Liam O'Connor, 35 years old, stepped out of a float plane onto the stony shoreline of a remote inlet on Kodiak Island. He had joined a small group of adventurers for a week of fishing and photography in one of the wildest parts of Alaska. Liam worked as an outdoor instructor back home and loved spending days in rugged country far from cities. He had saved for months to join this expedition, drawn by the promise of untouched landscapes, clear waters filled with salmon, and the chance to capture rare photographs of wildlife. Though he was experienced in hiking and camping, the dense forests and unpredictable fog of Kodiak carried dangers even he could not fully prepare for. The group moved carefully along the shore, unloading heavy packs and coolers filled with supplies. Their float plane lifted away, leaving behind only the hiss of waves and the rustle of wind through spruce trees. The campers busied themselves with gear, setting up shelters near the water's edge. Liam took charge of raising a tent while others arranged food storage. The fog thickened around the inlet, enveloping the tree line in a pale gray haze. Visibility dropped so sharply that the forest seemed to lean closer, shapes blurring into shifting shadows. What none of them saw was the massive Kodiak bear already nearby, drawn from the woods by the strong scent of smoked fish and packaged meals. Hunger drove it silently through moss and brush until it reached the edge of the clearing. In the muffled quiet, its sudden movement went unnoticed until it burst forward. Liam, crouched by the tent poles, had only a heartbeat to react before the animal struck. The weight of the predator slammed him into shallow water, waves surging over his body as claws tore through his jacket and into his shoulder and back. Pain seared as the icy water soaked him, mixing with blood that spread into the inlet. The rest of the group erupted into panic, grabbing metal boxes and smashing them against rocks, their shouts echoing through the fog. Supplies were hurled toward the charging beast in a desperate attempt to force distance. The bear paused, turning its massive head toward the noise, then circled the shoreline with slow, deliberate steps. Its growls cut through the mist as it tested the group's defenses, claws scraping across slick stones. For long minutes, the campers stood rigid, fear holding them in place, while Liam struggled in the shallows, his body shaking from cold and pain. At last, the predator turned, slipping back into the dense brush, its form swallowed by the gray curtain of fog. The camp was left in ruin, with Liam bloodied in the water, his gear shredded, and the shoreline scarred by the ambush. The shoreline lay scattered with wreckage as silence slowly returned after the terrifying rush. Liam lay half-submerged, shivering violently as icy water soaked through torn clothing. His companions hauled him onto the stones, wrapping him in spare jackets and pressing cloth against deep wounds that streaked his arm and back. The fog hung heavy, muffling every sound, leaving them unsure whether the predator had truly gone or lingered unseen in the trees. Fear tightened every movement as the group worked quickly, knowing the animal could return at any moment. Their carefully packed supplies were ruined. Boxes lay crushed, food sacks ripped open, and fresh fish spoiled by mud and salt water. The camp they had hoped to rely on for comfort now stood broken, leaving them vulnerable and without security. Liam's injuries grew worse as minutes passed. Blood-soaked bandages, and his body shook not only from pain, but also from the creeping chill of hypothermia. His skin grew pale beneath layers of makeshift wraps. The group huddled close, debating silently with gestures, as none dared raise their voices too loud in the uncertain quiet. Hours stretched into a blur of exhaustion as they tended to Liam and guarded the shoreline. Every snapped twig or rustle in the fog made them clutch at rocks or poles, ready to defend themselves again. No one dared leave to explore deeper into the forest, for they knew the bear could be anywhere. Time slowed as survival took precedence over all other thoughts. By dawn the next day, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the scars left behind. Tents were shredded, equipment was broken, and the footprints of the massive animal were stamped deep into the wet ground. They managed to signal for rescue with flares, the bright sparks slicing through the pale sky. Relief came only when the distant hum of a plane carried across the inlet. The sound drew tears and weak smiles, though they stayed vigilant until the aircraft landed. Rescuers rushed to Liam, stabilizing him before carrying him aboard. His breaths came shallow, but his eyes flickered with stubborn awareness, unwilling to fade. The others followed, leaving behind a camp that bore clear marks of chaos and danger. The inlet that once promised beauty and peace now stood as a place scarred by fear. In the days that followed, officials emphasized the dangers of storing food close to camp in areas with predators. The warnings echoed what locals had long understood, that isolation, fog, and unsecured supplies create the perfect chance for sudden violence. Liam survived with scars across his body and memories he would never forget, a living reminder of how quickly wilderness can test even the most careful plans.